Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the latest updates on Tuna, the single mom who's been through a lot, and Kiet, the kind-hearted young man who's been by her side. There's been some serious drama recently, and we're going to unpack all the new twists and turns in their story. If you've been following their journey, you're in for some exciting surprises, and if you're just tuning in, trust me, you'll want to stick around for this. We've got all the details you won't want to miss, and things are about to get even more intense. What's next for Tu Nha and Kiet? The answers are just ahead, and you'll definitely want to see how it all unfolds. So grab your popcorn, hit that like button, and let's jump right into today's episode. You won't want to miss a minute of what's coming next. As the sun slowly rose, its warm light spilling over a small house nestled in the quiet countryside, Tu Nha sat on the porch, cradling her young daughter in her arms. The soft sound of birds singing filled the air, and a gentle breeze swept through, creating a peaceful moment. Yet, despite the serenity of the morning, Tu Nha couldn't shake the thoughts racing through her mind. I wonder if Kiet will ever come by to visit us again, she thought to herself, a wave of sadness washing over her. Her ex-husband had returned, and the weight of that truth was something she couldn't ignore. Kiet knew about everything, the past, the decisions they had made. It was all clear between them now. Her daughter, ever the sweet and well-behaved child, looked up at her with innocent eyes. Tu Nha smiled down at her, but even the warmth of that smile couldn't fully ease the heavy feeling inside. Today, like every day, she will make a simple breakfast for the two of them, just a small meal to start the day. Not for herself, though. Today it was for her daughter. She decided on a bit of hot rice, some fried eggs, and a few small squashes she had picked from her tiny garden. As she looked around at her humble home, she couldn't help but thought, this place is falling apart. I need to fix it. It's been a while, but I'll get around to it. The small squashes were more than just food. They symbolized the little things that made her day-to-day life work. Tu Nha stood up, the soft sound of the wooden floor creaking beneath her, and walked over to the stove. The fire cracked gently as the pot of squash soup simmered away, releasing a savory aroma into the air. A few eggs fried in the pan beside it, their golden yolks bright against the sizzling oil. These were the simple comforts of her life, things she had prepared so many times before, but today they feel different. Today, everything felt like it was coming to a head, like the past was about to catch up with her. The small wicker basket, always by her side no matter where she went, was once again in her hands, ready to hold whenever she needed. She filled it with the small things she had prepared, the rice, the squash, and the eggs. Her mind briefly drifted back to the days when life felt easier, when there were fewer worries and more hope. But now, the weight of her decisions seemed impossible to ignore. As everything was set, the meal was ready, but something in the air told Tu Nha that this day, like so many others, would be filled with quiet, unanswered questions. She looked down at her daughter, who smiled up at her, oblivious to the thoughts swirling in her mother's mind. The day was starting, and she had done what she could. Now it was just a matter of moving forward. Everything was ready. But the past? The past was still there, lingering in the corners of her home, waiting to be faced. In the carpentry shop, Kiet was working hard, carefully measuring the large logs in front of him. This batch of wood is all high quality, beautiful and big, he thought to himself, looking at the neatly stacked pile of wood. He had spent hours cutting and shaping the wood, making sure every piece was perfect. As he stood there, lost in thought, something caught his eye. He squinted, his heart suddenly beating fast. Is that Tu Nha and her daughter? He wondered, a knot tightening in his stomach. Ever since Tu Nha's ex-husband had returned, Kiet had been avoiding her. The tension between them, the unresolved feelings, had made it impossible for him to face her. Without thinking, he quickly hid behind one of the larger logs, trying to stay out of sight. He couldn't let her see him right now, not like this. His eyes followed her as she walked around the workshop, her presence stirring emotions he wasn't ready to deal with. The sound of sawing continued, the rhythmic cutting of saws in the air, but Kiet's attention was elsewhere. Sunlight streamed through the shop windows, casting a warm glow over the space. He couldn't help but watch her from the shadows, his mind racing with the possibilities that might happen if he stepped forward. Meanwhile, Tu Nha, holding her little daughter in her arms, entered the workshop. She looked around, calling, "Kiet! Kiet, where are you?" Her voice echoed throughout the shop, but there was no answer. She walked, looking around, but still couldn't find him. Anxiety began to rise, and she muttered softly to her daughter, "Where could Kiet be? He usually takes a nap here in the afternoon." Tu Nha paused for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe he was just busy with something. She wasn't upset, but uncertainty gnawed at her. Thinking that Kiet must be busy with work, she decided to sit down and wait. She gently placed her daughter on the wooden chair, sitting down next to her. The two of them sat there in the quiet workshop waiting for Kiet to return, unaware that he was only a few feet away, watching them from behind a pile of wood. For a moment, time seemed to stop, and Tu Nha couldn't help but wonder why Kiet hadn't come out to greet her yet. Maybe he was just absorbed in his work, or maybe there was something else holding him back. Either way, she felt that there was more to this silence than met the eye. Kiet watched Tu Nha from the shadows, his eyes tracking her every move, but he couldn't bring himself to face her. The weight of everything between them was too much to confront. He stayed hidden, telling himself, "Why is she still here? What does she want from me?" The steady hum of the saw cutting through the wood echoed in his ears, but his mind was consumed with uncertainty. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was avoiding something important, something he couldn't face. Tu Nha, on the other hand, grew tired of waiting. Her patience had worn thin, and with her daughter in her arms, she decided it was time to leave. But before she left something behind, an act of care, however small. She placed a lunchbox on the table, the same one she had put together that morning with care and thought. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture that spoke volumes. It was her way of showing him that she still thought of him, that she still cared, even if they weren't together anymore. Kiet didn't notice the lunchbox until much later. When he returned to the workshop, the first thing his eyes landed on was the small box sitting on the table. He opened it slowly, almost hesitantly, his face clouded with a mix of sadness and confusion. Inside, the food was still warm, carefully packed, and it was clear she had put effort into it. But it wasn't just the food that struck him. It was the unspoken message behind it. He stared at the lunchbox for a long moment, the weight of it settling in. He wondered if he was doing the right thing, if avoiding her was the right decision. "Am I making the right choice?" he thought to himself. The silence in the shop seemed louder now, the buzzing of his thoughts drowning out the sound of the saw. He couldn't deny it any longer. The lunchbox, simple as it was, had said everything. Tu Nha still cared. Despite the distance, despite everything that had happened, she still thought of him. That realization hit Kiet harder than he expected. It made him question everything. Had he been too quick to shut her out? Should he have talked to her? As Kiet sat there, the lunchbox still in front of him, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. It was clear that Tu Nha was reaching out in her own quiet way, trying to bridge the gap between them. He had avoided her for so long, telling himself it was easier this way, but deep down, he knew the truth. The truth was, he had never really stopped caring either. The lunchbox was a reminder of that, a reminder of the connection they once shared, and the one that still lingered between them. The small dirt road leading to the field stretched out ahead of Tu Nha as she walked slowly, her steps steady and deliberate. She reached the pumpkin patch where she set down her basket and began picking the young pumpkins. The soft sound of birds chirping filled the air, creating a peaceful, almost serene atmosphere. Tu Nha moved from one vine to the next, carefully selecting the tender pumpkins, placing them gently into her basket. As she filled it, the weight of the basket grew heavier, but she didn't mind. It was the work she knew well. As she made her way to the market, her thoughts were still on Kiet. It was hard to shake the memories, the feelings, the questions that lingered in her mind. She couldn't help but wonder what he was doing, what he was thinking, and if he ever thought about her. When she reached the market, Tu Nha paused in a quiet corner, lowering the basket from her shoulder and carefully arranging the pumpkins she had worked so hard to gather. "Fresh pumpkins! Come and get them," she called out to the passing shoppers. "These are really tender. Only 15,000 Vietnamese dong per kilo," she added, her voice warm, inviting. She sat there for a while watching the people pass by. One by one they stopped, admiring her pumpkins, and soon enough they began to buy them. The market was bustling, and in no time her goods were sold out. She had worked hard to gather the pumpkins, and the satisfaction of seeing her basket empty felt like a small victory, though her mind was still far away. On Kiet, on the life that seemed to be slipping further and further from her grasp. As the last of her pumpkins were purchased, Tu Nha quietly gathered her things, feeling a mix of pride and longing. The market was quieter now, but her heart was still full of questions, and she couldn't help but wonder what her next step would be. Kiet knew he couldn't keep avoiding Tu Nha. He understood that things couldn't stay the way they were. As the workday came to a close, the midday break arrived. He sat down at his usual spot, looking at the lunchbox she had left for him earlier. He opened it slowly and paused, staring at the contents for a moment. Tu Nha really cares about me, doesn't she? He thought, feeling a lump rise in his throat. His emotions got the best of him, and for a second, he felt like tears might spill over. But he quickly wiped his face, pushing those feelings deep down. The truth was, he and Tu Nha could only ever be friends now. Her husband was back, and that reality left Kiet with a deep sadness. He sat there for a while, wrestling with his emotions. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just let things go. Something about her ex-husband, the one who had caused so much pain for Tu Nha and her daughter, kept nagging at him. Kiet didn't want to just let the past slide by. He had to know more about the man who had put them through so much suffering. By the afternoon, Kiet had made up his mind. He would visit Tu Nha and her daughter. He wanted to thank her in person for the lunch she had made him, to show his appreciation for the small but meaningful gesture. But when he arrived at her house, he found it empty. The small, quiet home sat still in the afternoon light. Kiet stood there for a moment, wondering if they had gone out. He called out softly, "Is Tu Nha and her daughter home?" But there was no answer. He waited, hoping they might return, but after some time it was clear they weren't coming back that day. Disappointed, Kiet sat for a while, but the silence of the empty house only deepened his sense of longing. He wanted to see her, even if just for a moment, to express his gratitude. But that wasn't going to happen today. With a heavy heart, he stood up and left, his mind swirling with confusion. He couldn't help but feel like he was losing his chance to make things right, that he might never have the opportunity to tell Tuna how much he truly appreciated everything she had done for him. As Kiet walked away from the quiet house, the weight of his unspoken feelings pressed on him, and he couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find a way to be truly present in her life again.